So now he gets, let's just zip down to verse 24 since they notified me. Look what it says. After this beautiful adoration confession thing and after this key to the Bible study about hearing God's voice every day, look what verse 24 says. 70 weeks are determined for your people, for your holy city, to finish transgressions, to make an end of sin, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, to anoint the most holy. God has a clear plan. It's revealed as what's called the 70 weeks of prophecy. The word for a 7-day week is not this word. Look at chapter 10, verses 2 and 3. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 full weeks. The word weeks, we all know what that means. He wasn't mourning for an indeterminate amount of time. He was mourning for these 7-day periods. Okay? That word weeks, sadly, is translated like it's the same word as verse 24, 25, 26, and 27. The word in chapter 9, verse 24, and again in 25, and again in 26, and again in 27, is actually the word in English we would call heptad. You know, we have dozens. What does dozen mean? Groups of 12. You know, you say, I want a dozen pencils. I want a dozen, most Americans say a dozen donuts, you know. That's what we want. And get a dozen. We don't say 12, it's dozen. And when we say dozen, we know it means 12, groups of 12. Heptad is groups of 7. And by the way, God and the Jewish people and the scriptures are big into heptads. In fact, the Bible is constructed in a heptadic structure. There are 7s everywhere. I mean, we were singing Thomas Obadiah Chisholm's hymn, Great is Thy Faithfulness. That comes from what? The book of Lamentations, right? It actually comes from the very center because the book is heptadic. And it has 7 poems, and the very first verse of the 4th poem, which is the very center of the book, is that verse that hymn comes from. It's all seen because they saw heptadic things. So this heptad, it's 70 heptads, 70 groups of 7. And they're not weeks. They're not weeks like 7 days. They're different things. They're groupings of 7. And to understand what the context is, he goes on, let me show this. First, the 70 weeks of Daniel in verse 24 show us the scope of the whole thing. Then in verse 25, he talks about the first 69 weeks as being a group. See in verse 25, know therefore and understand from the going forth of the command. Oh, this is a historic moment that's in Wikipedia, by the way, if you even believe that. The command to restore and build Jerusalem. I took the kids there. When we were in the British Museum, there's the Cyrus cylinder. By the way, I saw one in the Louvre too. One of them can't be real, but you know how they make copies of stuff. And there is Cyrus's cylinder, and it actually is the command. It's baked in clay. It's the actual one Cyrus made. It's a historic date. See, the Bible is about real people in real places and real events that happen. And it's amazing to see it in museums. To restore and build Jerusalem. Until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. What is that? 69 weeks. 69 of these heptads, these groups. Then the next thing it says in verse 26, it continues in verse 25, the street will be built in troublesome times, but after the 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. That's one of the clearest substitutionary atonement. You know, Jesus is the substitute verses in the Bible. Jesus was cut off, not because he sinned, but because he was being punished for my sins. That's what we share with people, right? There's no record of my sins. I'm the worst sinner I know in the whole world, and God doesn't even have a record of my sins. He already put them on Christ. And so he punished Jesus on the cross like he did every sin I've ever done. So then it says in verse 26, and the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. That's Jerusalem and the temple. In the end, it will be a flood until the end of wars and desolations are determined. Then he Who's that? He's the prince that's earlier, the prince of the people that destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. By the way, who were they? Not the Jews, the Romans. And so there's this interval of time between the crucifixion, and then there's this verse 27. He shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. That's the last one left. 69 have been used up. There's one heptad left. But in the middle of the heptad, he will bring an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of an abomination. That's what Jesus quotes. In verse 15 of chapter 24 of Matthew, Jesus said, when you see the abomination that causes desolation standing in the temple, run. He's telling the Jews, run. Those in Judea, run. Wow.